I know that we talked about it several times. So thank you, Rob, for agreeing to do this, especially the board recognizes your sacrifice of time, and we'll let Gene do the introduction.
All right. Well, Rob Thurston, I met, it's going almost 2 years ago. He did a presentation for the DUP down at the high school auditorium with all of his memorabilia and his stories. And I was impressed. And so I tried to get him last summer, and he was busy, or we had speakers. And then all of this pandemic hit. And so this is the earliest we've been able to get our schedules back together. So we're just glad to have Rob. Thurston comes from Thurston's, so he's a local boy, even though he doesn't live here. So, Rob, we appreciate your time, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. It's indeed a pleasure to be with all of you. You're going to get a kick out of this, I hope, and we're going to spend 45 minutes. In 2017, the Deseret News, their number one trending article in the nation that they did that year was about journal that was discovered, sheds light on Temple Square mystery. And what this was, it was a story that was about my finding a box in my grandmother's basement, and it was under her stairwell. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen a shirt box, and this is a cream colored shirt box. And I found this box, and I have the bottom of it too. And in the box, I looked at it, and it looked like a bunch of junk. And my mother had told me that when she was cleaning out her mother-in-law's attic, and she just put it in the basement, and she was thinking maybe she would just throw it away. Well, there were actually 190 different things in that box. And not being very smart, I noticed there was a photo. And the photo was of this gentleman. And if you look down here, his name was Jesse C. Little, Jesse Carter Little. And there was also a photo of his wife. And I found out later he had 3 wives. And I didn't think much of it. And we took it to a BYU professor. And this BYU professor looked at it. And just so you'll know, recently the Mormon Church, as well as the University of Utah, for the 190 things in the box, have offered us $2 million for the things in the box. So today, a total shocker. So I didn't know this, but Jesse C. Little is my second great grandfather. And maybe some of you of board members are related to the Littles. And as you know, Littleton, as well as Morgan County, they've been there since the 1860s. In fact, Jesse C. Little retired as the second counselor in the presiding bishopric of the Mormon Church in 1872 because he wanted to farm and ranch up in Morgan, which is where his family was. So as I was looking through things through the box, I also noticed that there were things from my other great-great-grandfather, and his name was Thomas Jefferson Thurston. And Thurston Peak there in Morgan, as well as you all know, the entire county, he was the one who found it. And just really happy to be able to share some stories in the next few minutes. And we will, the first thing I want to show you is something that was in the bottom of the box, and I really didn't know what it was. But according to the newspaper article, after they did research, you'll notice there's a picture of this same journal. This is a pioneer journal, and I didn't really think much of it. It looks pretty old and didn't look very impressive, but this was carried in the very first pioneer company that entered the valley. And Jesse C. Little was on one of the advance company horses, and he and the guide were the first ones to enter the valley of the Great Salt Lake, and he recorded it. And over the years, he kept track of things like each new place that they visited, leaving from winter quarters, and he would put the longitude, the latitude, the temperature, the barometric pressure. and the date and how many miles they went. And so I didn't think much about this until the Mormon Church offered me a lot of money for it. In fact, I was pretty shocked that we had an appraisal done for the University of Utah, and they told us this little journal is worth $300,000. So we were totally shocked. What did this tell us? Well, what it told us is that when Jesse C. Little and the Advance Company went into the valley, they tilled the ground and planted crops the very first day they were there. But he had also used a compass and a sextant, and he was able to calculate it was 114 and a half miles from Fort Bridger, Wyoming, to the Valley of Great Salt Lake. Now, when the church historians looked at this journal, they said, well, that's not really correct. It's actually 112 miles to the valley. And I didn't know what to say. I had this journal and, so anyway, what we did is we contacted NASA, the space people, and they actually took the longitude, the latitude, and everything else, punched it into their satellite system. And where 114 and a half miles from Fort Bridger is the exact corner of Temple Square. So in 1847, on July 24th, when Brigham Young entered the valley, it used to be that Brigham Young took several days where he picked out where the Temple Square would be. Well, according to this journal, which is legitimate and has been proven, they actually laid out Temple Square, the boundaries, on July 24th, the first day that they were in the valley. Where was this? It was in a cream-colored shirt box that we had, as a family, had always thought had been destroyed. You guys get a kick out of this. The Thurston family had an old home there in Morgan, and it burned to the ground in 1920, and all the locals talk about it. We always thought all the pioneer journals and everything else had been destroyed. So you can imagine how I felt to find this journal and another journal as well that are priceless to our family, which we want to make available to researchers. And it names Devil's Gate. It names the Hole in the Rock area. It names the Big Muddy. It names all sorts of things. In fact, you'll get a kick out of this. This was outside the box, but it was just sitting there. And it looks like a rock, right? No big deal. However, in the Pioneer Journal, it talks about how Jesse C. Little with Orson Pratt and Thomas Bullock went out from the party and were in the Big Muddy of Wyoming, right near where, as you know, Martin's Cove is. And he found an interesting rock with fossils, and it's recorded in his journal. So here our family thought this was just an old piece of rock from someplace. And now we know this was actually picked up on the very first Pioneer Trek as a souvenir. And I've had the BYU geology department, date the stone and also where it would have come from. And it has been shown to be from the Big Muddy. So what you think is some kind of trash or just rocks turns out to be something really valuable. Another interesting thing, and this was given to me as part of my inheritance, so it wasn't in the box, was what's called a gold scale. Now, this was in my possession for about 30 years, and I never thought anything of it. In fact, when I looked it up on the internet, it's really an apothecary scale for measuring drugs. And I thought, okay, that's cool. My family was into drugs, but actually what it was is my family was into getting a gold scale. The date on these gold coins are all 1846. And as you know, the first Pioneer Party arrived in Salt Lake in 1847. And what made this scale so important to me, I looked it up on the internet. They were selling for $200, $250. I was thinking, hey, do I want to sell this? And then when I found out this was actually owned by Jesse C. Little, he bought this scale because Brigham Young wanted him to weigh the gold that was paid to the Mormon battalion so that the party could advance to the Great Salt Lake and pay for all the women and the orphans and the other ones who were part of the families of the Mormon Battalion to come to Utah. I have been offered $10,000 for this from the state of California because it was also used during the gold rush. So you never know, guys. Sometimes these things, you think they're worthless, they're worth $250, and then you find out that Jesse C. Little used this in Mexico, in California, and during the Pioneer Trek to weigh the Mormon Battalion gold, and then also for many years in Morgan County. Now, before I get to talking about the settling and discovery of Morgan County, I want to show you two things that happened with Jesse C. Little that you maybe didn't know, and I definitely didn't know. Well, in the box was this book, and it's a very small little book, and it's actually a hymnal. Now, we've all heard about in 1835, Emma Smith was commanded to write a hymn book for the church. Well, you didn't know that in 1842, Jesse C. Little joined the church, and in 1844, he was asked to create a hymnal. And he created a hymnal, and the very first hymn in here is "The Spirit of God like a fire is burning." The church has never known who actually wrote that. The music is from popular music, but he actually is the author of "The Spirit of God like a fire is burning." And he put to music all the words that Emma Smith had in the original Pioneer Journal because it had no music put to it. A copy of this is at Brigham Young University in their secured collection, $47,000. Can you see why I'm so surprised to find these things in a cream-colored shirt box? It just kind of blew me away. And then the last thing, this is before he came to Utah. This is a letter that's addressed to President James K. Polk, and the date is Washington, D.C., June 1st, 1846. And it's a copy in his handwriting. This is the letter that was given to President Polk telling him that they needed to help the Mormons go west, and that if Polk didn't call and pay for the Mormon Battalion, that those men, as well as the saints, would go on to California. Now, I know you guys really hadn't heard this before, or to Washington State, where England, Great Britain, had a colony, and that the Mormons would join up and become citizens of Great Britain if President Polk didn't help the Mormons. This has been popularly known in the church as the war letter, because in essence, the church declared war that they would leave the United States. This letter is the only known copy. The original was donated by my family to the church many years ago, but this is the only known copy. Polk actually destroyed this letter because he was embarrassed by it, and it's not even in his records or history. However, this letter, according to some historians, is one of the most important letters, non-revelation, in the Mormon church, because it totally changed the direction, the location, and the destiny of the saints. I don't know how much it's worth. There's been estimates on it, but however, it's really kind of cool. So Jesse C. Little comes to Utah with the advance party, and then he's a real Renaissance man. So I've already told you he's an author. He keeps great journals. He's a horseman. He also, writes eloquent letters threatening the president of the United States. Then he also has a hotel with Brigham Young, but he also liked to make things. And so he actually made these two metal tops. And we have let kids try to get them going. It's really hard, as you know, with a piece of string to get an old wooden top going. However, some of the people have had that capability. So Jesse comes to Utah. He gets called as a second counselor in the presiding bishopric of the church, and he serves for 20 years. But all this time, he wants to be a farmer. He wants to have a simpler life. So he married 3 different wives. And while he's doing that, Brigham Young writes him a letter. And here's a letter from, I think it's about 1866. There's Brigham Young's signature. You guys can all see that. Just just because this letter has Brigham Young's signature on it, it's worth about $17,000 all by itself. The letter, though, authorizes Jesse C. Little to go to Morgan and put in a mill, a grist mill, because there's a lot of water, as you know, and they had to block up the water and things from the river, and to put in a grist mill, and also to put in a kind of a bishop's storehouse. So Jesse goes and does that. But while he's doing that, in the old days, the church, and in fact, I'm going to take this out. It's a little shiny. The church was issuing money. Now, you guys have all heard of Nauvoo notes and bills and things like that. This is for the 13th ward in downtown Salt Lake, of which Jesse was a member when he was a member of the presiding bishopric of the church. When I saw this, I thought, oh, this is kind of cool, a certificate. Well, this actually has Edwin Woolley, who apostatized from the church and became a polygamist. His son and he were the bishop of Jesse's ward, but this is actually made out to Jesse C. Little. They've only found one of these outside of the ones, and I have 4 of them that were in the box. And Rust Coin, until they went out of business, had this offered for sale for $6,500 for a $25 bank share. So Jesse and the church raised money to do construction and things like that. And he wrote a letter in 1850, and this was in the box as well, just to somebody back east saying, hey, things are great in Utah. We're really enjoying ourselves. We planted crops. We're going to be successful. And when I saw this, I thought, well, this is kind of a dumb letter. This doesn't have any value. But then the Mormon church showed me, look, Rob, he goes, this is the only known typeset copy of the proclamation by the church stating the kingdom of Deseret, and that we're going to have a kingdom that stretches all the way from Colorado to San Bernardino to San Diego in California, where we'll have shipping. And this is the declaration that was signed by the people in Utah in 1850, establishing the kingdom of Deseret. All in this box. So Jesse was kind of a Renaissance guy. And he had some interesting predictions and other things that he did. But one of the things he always did is he kept notes. As you know, there weren't mimeograph machines or copy machines or everything else. So he would make multiple copies of not only his journals, but also of letters. And as he got a little bit older, he figured out that, man, it was taking him a long time to write. So he would use bank paper or things like that and write down his notes on them. So when I saw this, I said, okay, he wrote something about Morgan County. And then I looked at the date on this. And he wrote this in 1846. If you remember, the prophet Joseph and Hiram were martyred in 1844. So he wrote this down in 1846 when he was the presiding elder of the church for the Eastern United States. Brigham Young and the apostles had already left and were at winter quarters suffering. Well, he was sitting there back east, the presiding elder of the church. He had just talked to President Polk, and he wanted to know what he should be doing. And I'm going to read you some of this because in December of 1846, he goes, I was sleeping. Let's see, here it is. I returned to bed, and Joseph Smith appeared to me in a dream and told me to be sure and go and overtake Brigham and the pioneers to find a home for the saints. And that was to be the most important thing for me to do and go right then. And I was filled with an influence of leaving my family at this time. So he grabbed a horse, he got some pistols and a rifle, he bought that gold scale, and he took off the next day. And I was filled with an influence to leave my family at this time, and I did not delay. This person, this person has to describe it. This was Joseph Smith. This was evidence that Brigham and the 12 were the proper leaders of the people, and that Joseph sustained it. Jesse C. Little. I had tears in my eyes when I saw this, handwritten in pencil. And so can you imagine when Jesse C. Little and Orrin Porter Rockwell, who was his guard guarding the Mormon Battalion money, when they showed up at winter quarters with the money, and Jesse told Brigham about his dream of seeing Joseph Smith. Brigham immediately made him his adjunct lieutenant for the trip, the colonel. And that's why Colonel Jesse C. Little was always known as a colonel, because he was made a member of the Mormon Battalion on the spot. He was in the advanced party and was the first one to go into the valley. What a life-changing event for him. And then he left immediately and went back and got his family to Utah. Well, what happened to Morgan County? Well, Thomas Jefferson Thurston went and hiked a peak, and he looked down into Morgan County, and he saw that the river was almost impossible to get through to get into the valley. And so he and some other men by hand carved out right where the railroad tracks are, and they finally were able to enter into the valley. And when they did, they saw it was a beautiful valley, as you all know, and they decided to settle it. So they all moved from Ogden, Utah, and settled Morgan. And as you know, various things happened. Well, in the first year that they were there, Thomas Jefferson Thurston had a son, and his son's name was John Thomas Thurston. Now, there's some controversy in Morgan. Some of the other people say, no, the first white-born settler in Morgan County was such and such. However, according to the records that we have, John Thomas Thurston here was the first white male child born in Morgan County. Anyway, John Thomas Thurston, you could see, was a great hunter. And he took a picture with his dog and his gun when he had it done. And there's stories of him shooting bears and being attacked by animals and things like that. And we still have this gun in our family possession. A couple of years ago, when we talked to the Daughters of Utah Pioneer Museum, we showed the gun and we brought this. Well, as you know, when Jesse C. Little moved to Morgan, there was already a bishop there in Morgan, and it was Thomas Jefferson Thurston. And here is actual tithing receipts from Thomas Jefferson Thurston in 1863 all the way through 1871 of Jesse C. Little, what he was paying in tithing receipts and tithing and tithes and offerings to the church. This is a real tender mercy for me because it's one of my great-great-grandfathers, Thomas Jefferson Thurston, taking tithing from my other great-great-grandfather. Can you imagine this was in the box just sitting there? So when they settled Morgan, they needed a postmaster. And Jesse C. Little later in his life became the postmaster and also the mailman for Morgan County. And he would take along in the winter a sled called the Bluebird, and during the summer a wagon, and he would go and deliver the mail. And one of the sweet things is he also was a scribe. And Edward Hunter, who was the presiding bishop of the church in the year 1874, gave to Jesse C. Little the rights to that grist mill, the flour mill there in Morgan County, so that he'd have a job to do since he was no longer in the presiding bishopric of the church. Just so you'll know, Edward W. Hunter is Howard W. Hunter's grandfather. And Jesse C. Little is my great-great-grandfather. And here is the receipt for that. Again, and you'll know that things are really legitimate because back in the day, people, when they would make copies of letters, then in red on the outside, would write about what the letter was about and the date. And that was their filing system. So that was a tender mercy to find that as well. Well, we've got about, we've got 20 minutes left of the 45. I want to read you something. So when Jesse C. Little was an old man in 1891, painfully with arthritis at this point, he wrote a talk. And the reason is he was offered to give the speech for the 4th of July celebration in Morgan County on July 4th, 1891. And they had a committee called the Committee of Arrangements for the Celebration at Morgan County. So they had Jesse talk. And of course, we've had it transposed. But in 1891, if you remember, the car, the automobile had not been created. Airplanes had not been created. Highways had not been created. But Jesse C. Little, an old man at this point, he makes a prediction. He says, America is the land of Zions. The prophets say their land is full of gold and silver. Neither is there an end to their treasure. Their land is full of horses. Neither is there any end to their chariots. I predict the chariots shall be with flaming torches in the day of God's preparation. The chariots shall rage in the streets. They shall jostle one against another in the broad ways. They shall run like lightnings from the Atlantic to the great Pacific Sea, for it is the broad way of the gods' great highway. America is the land of Zion. America will be the great stage and field of operations of the gods and the dwelling places, and they shall fly in the sky. Now is the time of the end. 1891. He predicted flaming chariots, highways going from Atlantic to Pacific, flying in the skies. And this took place at the 4th of July celebration that we do every year in Morgan County. Is that cool or what? Another thing that Jesse did is he recorded the patriarchal blessings given to his family and to his sons and to himself. And this is the patriarchal blessing of his wife. And it was given by John A. Smith, who was a uncle of Joseph Smith, I believe. I hope I got that right. But anyway, it's in Jesse's own handwriting, and it's her patriarchal blessing, his first wife. And it's such a treasure to have that in our possession. Another thing that Jesse did, he became the first notary public in Morgan County. So in 1878, they finally decided they needed notary publics. And the governor of the state of Utah made him the notary. And I have a copy of his seal that he used. We can't find the actual stamp itself, but this is the actual certificate from 1878, making him the notary public. And then, as I said, he was the postmaster. You guys will get a kick out of this. If you look closely, this is an original letter from John Sears of Sears Roebuck to Morgan County saying, hey, we'd like you guys to deliver our products through your mail system. Can you handle that? And so here it is. And then his actual signature on the back. This was just folded up in the box. No one knew what it was. They didn't think it was worth anything. And so, you know, over time, my family has found things like this is a silver napkin ring that has Jesse's first wife's initial on it. We originally thought it was nothing. We were just going to sell it or melt it for silver. Then Jesse did really sweet things. When grandchildren or his children would be born, he would have pewter or silver cups made. This one has the handle broken from it, but the initials of my grandfather that Jesse gave to his parents. It's very sweet to me. The other thing that you should know is even back in the box were receipts for the school district, the Morgan County Superintendent School District. These are from 1897 by my great-grandmother, Alice Thurston, who was married. She was Alice Josephine Little, Jesse's daughter. She married my great-grandfather. And these receipts, this will give you a kick. The cost to go to school back in 1896, each person was assessed $1.95. Guess how many kids were in all of Morgan County in 1896? 56. So here's the receipt here for 56 kids to go to school in Morgan County. And there's the one in 1897. And apparently they weren't propagating or having a lot of kids because it's still 56 kids in all of Morgan County to go to school. And there's the receipts. A couple of other things that I'll show you in the last minute. Lest you think that Jesse, as he got older, quit writing, this is a 60-page transcription of a 96-page letter that he wrote to one of the apostles of the church, where he goes over the history of the church his experiences, his trek, his settling Morgan County, what went on in that great state, that he's asking for funds that a road could be built over the mountains to cut off the time to get from Salt Lake to Morgan County. Because as you know, they used to have to go by the river through Ogden and then down. And so he got permission, and then he got federal funds to not only get the railroad to go through, but also to build a shortcut road through the south part of Morgan County to Salt Lake. Interesting letter. At the end, though, he complains. So he's had a tough life, even though he's very wealthy when he first joined the church. He was the presiding elder of the church. He was in the second counselor in the presiding bishopric, but farming was hard in Morgan. And that's probably not a surprise to any of you to hear this. And he goes, I'm not asking for myself because I have no clothing for myself, but Levi overalls since April 1885. And this letter was written in 1890. So he claims he hasn't had any money to buy clothes in 5 years. So I am sadly in need, but there are some small bills, all of which it would please me to have you pay. It's quite enough for me to know that I owe. It is equal to a note of hand without limitation of law or time. So he's actually asking the church to reimburse him for some of the expenses that he's incurred over the years in working with the church. Very heartbreaking letter to read this. However, this is what happened to a lot of people back in the day. After he was no longer presiding bishopric of the church, they started paying the general authorities. So his letter apparently had some good. However, for himself, we never know if he ever got reimbursed for some of his expenses that he had. So with him struggling like he did, I want to show you something. He entered into an agreement with Samuel Brannan. Samuel Brannan was on the ship Brooklyn that went to San Francisco and landed there. Samuel Brannan was the presiding elder of the church in the East before Jesse C. Little. So they stayed lifetime friends. Well, Samuel Brannan at one point was the richest man in California. He was the one who took the tithing from the Mormon battalion boys at Sutter's Mill. However, he got excommunicated because he didn't send the tithing on to Salt Lake. In fact, Brigham Young said Orrin Porter Rockwell to collect the money. And even though Orrin threatened him, Brannan had his own bodyguards. Well, anyway, Brannan later in life was broke. So Brannan worked out a deal with the state of Sonora, Mexico to own land there. And he said he would survey it. And he sold notes to buy land. My great-great-grandfather, being the sucker that he was, he bought hundreds and hundreds and thousands of acres in Sonora, Mexico, and paid Samuel Brannan. Here's Samuel Brannan's signature and everything else on this note. Well, when we got these, we kind of laughed because there's 13 of them in our possession in the box. And we thought they were worthless. And we were hoping they weren't. But do you know where the largest gold and silver mines in North and South America are located? Sonora, Mexico. And if only Samuel Brannan and Jesse C. Little had finished the survey, but the Yaqui and the Apache Indians were there that were killing all the people during the surveys. So they abandoned it. They pitched to John Taylor in the 5 minutes remaining to have the Mormon settlers go down to Sonora, Mexico, rather than to Colonial Juarez, rather than to the other area of Mexico where the church is so strong now. If they had done that, the silver mines that were later discovered are worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. We tried to enforce these notes to see if they were still valid with the Mexican government, and they laughed at us. So these have value as a collector's item, but not in terms of owning any of the gold mines. Darn it, we're really upset about that. So in closing, I just want to tell you how proud I am of Morgan County. Proud that this kind of entrepreneur, Renaissance man, Jesse C. Little, hung in there and helped found Morgan County. I'm excited about the first white male born person, John Thomas Thurston, the son of Thomas Jefferson Thurston, and that he was a lifelong resident hunter. And as you know, who raised horses. And you all know about the famous Clydesdale horses and the Thurston family for years in Morgan County. These are the treasures that we found. But the biggest legacy is just to know that I didn't throw them away. My mother didn't throw them away. We found them in the cream-colored shirt box. And hopefully everyone will have access to it as it gets donated to the University of Utah. They have assured us that researchers are fascinated by this. In closing, just want to tell you one last thing. We all know and should be proud of our heritage. However, there is kind of a dark spot on our heritage. Jessie Carter Little, oldest sister, married a man, and his name was Frederick Loring. And she moved from New Hampshire, where she was a member of the church. And with Frederick Loring, they moved to a town called Carthage, Illinois. Frederick Loring joined the Carthage Grays. Frederick Loring was very upset because he never inherited the money his family had back in New Hampshire. When he joined the Carthage Grays, he began to persecute the saints. In the box are 2 letters of Jessie Carter Little lamenting the fact that the murderer of Joseph and Hiram Smith was one of the Carthage Grays who was outside the window 50 or 60 yards away, and using a particular type of gun, shot Joseph Smith. Now, Hiram Smith, his descendants have disputed that because they've proven, not proven statistically, that on the clothes of Hiram Smith that they still have in their possession, the bloodstains are in the front of his shirt and not in his back. So I can't comment on that, but I know in 1846, Jessie C. Little writes a letter to his sister and laments the fact that her husband had killed Joseph and Hiram and was at the Carthage Grays. I have a letter from 1872, Jessie C. Little asking Brigham Young what they should do about this situation because his sister should be sealed in the temple, and yet they don't want him to be sealed to this Frederick Loring. And so Daniel H. Wells, the first counselor in the presidency of the church, asks if he can be sealed to Mary Loring Little, who's Jessie C. Little's sister, rather than Frederick Loring, who had murdered the prophet. Researchers, as you might imagine, are fascinated by this and want to do more work. These are the things that are part of our heritage. I'm very grateful you've given me the opportunity today to talk about a great man, but even he had heartbreak and struggles and trials in his life. But along with Thomas and Jefferson Thurston and the Powells and the Lunds and some of the others, started and founded Morgan County. Thank you for letting me share that with you today. If we have any questions, I'd be happy to take questions, or we can just end it there.
Rob, that was a great presentation. Thanks for your time. So I have one question. It's kind of tail end, doesn't really weigh in too much. Why University of Utah instead of Brigham Young University that you mentioned first?
Oh, I'd be happy to share that. I guess it's public information. The Jessie C. Little papers and the Thomas Jefferson Thurston papers were really big. And for some reason, back in the 1890s, the family divided it into 3 different parcels. In 1972, my great aunt donated her parcel, a third, to Brigham Young University. However, Brigham Young University has refused to ever let copies be made of it and given to family members. Now, researchers can go in, and if you remember, I told you about the hymnal. I could go in and they'd let me see the hymnal, but they would not let me make copies of it or a photo or even a photograph. So our family was kind of upset that Brigham Young University had that stipulation. So then we went to the Mormon Church. And in 2015, my cousins that are out of California donated their third to the Mormon Church. Well, the Mormon Church had promised contractually to make copies of everything within 6 months. Well, we finally got copies of it last year. And they didn't give a good appraised value to my family that's in California. So when it became time for my box that we found in 2017, we took it first to the Mormon Church, but their offer to us was very low compared to the value that we would get as a donation if we donated it to the University of Utah. And the University of Utah says they will have access that everyone, including anyone from Morgan County, can go in and touch and see the original documents, and that we'll get a disk or a zip drive of all the professionally photographed copies of all the documents. Does that answer your question, Ralph?
Yes, it does. Thanks. And there's always a reason. I appreciate that.
Rick, do you have a question? Anything you want to know?
No, but I thoroughly enjoyed the time.
Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And I want you to know, at heart, I am a Morgan County boy. I've never lived there. We go and visit the grave sites. We have enjoyed our cousins that are up there. But my grandfather was the black sheep of the Thurston family, and he joined Union Pacific Railroad and traveled all across the state. And then they settled in Manti, Utah. So we kind of lost touch with Morgan for a while there.
Interestingly enough, I'm not a Morgan boy. I live awful close to Morgan, and I married a Rollins girl from Mountain Green.
Yep.
And her folks were part of those that came in to form Morgan County.
And we appreciate they stuck in there because, man, the winters are hard. And as you know, the irrigation was a major concern for the first 5 years until they could dam up the river a little bit and dry irrigate more than they normally would in Ogden and in Utah Valley.
Hey, Rob, this is Rick London.
Yes, Rick.
Where does your ancestry connect with Fred Thurston right now?
Fred is a second cousin. He comes from one of the three wives of Jesse C. Little. Of Thomas Jefferson Thurston. Thomas Jefferson Thurston had three wives. He actually abandoned two of them and left them in Morgan, and he moved down to St. George. And so I'm with the ones that went down to St. George, unfortunately. Fred's family, one of his wives, and they're buried, as you know, in the Milton Cemetery, I believe.
Yeah, there's Fred and Dale.
Oh, Dale. Yeah. Now Dale is closely related because they're from the same wife.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're the ones who, as you know, are the horsemen and all of that good
Yeah,
stuff.
Fred's in our ward. He's just down the road.
Yeah.
I still see him. Okay.
Yeah. Good people.
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, should we stop recording at this point?
Yes,
Yeah, I
I've
think it's
stopped on my
good stuff.
side.
Thank you. All right. Well, I appreciate all of you and your time today. And if my wife and I are set apart missionaries, and we're supposed to go to Argentina. And if we do, the stuff all gets donated to the University of Utah by the end of the year. If not, and we don't go because of the coronavirus, I'm more than willing when it's available to come up. And like we did with the Daughters of Utah Pioneers, use the high school or use the DUP museum and let you have people come and touch this stuff and look at it and even see things.
We appreciate the offer.
All righty. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.